Have you ever wondered why some people radiate peace and joy in their older years, while others seem burdened, even suffocated, by the very relationships that once brought them comfort? In this video, we're peeling back the layers of a quiet truth many hesitate to speak. After age 60, having a partner isn't always a blessing. Sometimes it's a burden. And no, we're not here to bash love or companionship. We're here to shine a compassionate, mindful light on 5 reasons why staying single after 60 might actually lead to greater freedom, peace, and joy. At Buddhist Mindfulness, we explore aging with wisdom, and today we're diving deep into personal stories, practical insight, and Buddhist reflection to uncover why solitude can be sacred and how to honor your inner truth in this golden chapter of life. So stay with us until the very end, because the final insight might change how you view relationships forever. And if you find value in this video, remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, Buddhist Mindfulness. Let's begin. Reason number 1, the emotional weight of constant compromise. In our youth, compromise feels like the glue of love, a necessary bond to keep relationships intact. We bend, we adjust, we accommodate, believing that this is how we show care, affection, and the willingness to meet others halfway. It feels natural to say, yes, I'll give a little here for the sake of the relationship, and in doing so, we build a foundation of shared experiences, mutual respect, and love. However, as the years pass, especially into our later years, this act of compromise can begin to feel different. Instead of building harmony, it can feel like shackles on our soul, an emotional weight that drags us down and erodes the very peace we once sought. Robert, a 74-year-old retiree, has lived a long life full of love, sacrifices, and compromises. Each morning, he would rise early to meditate and sip his tea in quiet solitude. It was a sacred ritual, a moment of peace to set the tone for the day. But over time, his wife, who had her own morning routine, insisted on blaring the television, turning the peaceful mornings into a noisy, chaotic start. At first, it seemed like a trivial issue, something small in the grand scheme of things. But day after day, Robert felt his ritual of quiet meditation being replaced by the constant noise of morning television. It was no longer just about the TV, it was about the subtle erosion of his space, his peace, and his sense of self. What once was a simple compromise had become a silent battle for his emotional well-being. It's easy to dismiss such small daily negotiations, thinking they are too insignificant to matter. Yet, when these moments accumulate, they begin to take a toll. The small compromises, made with the best of intentions, steal away our peace in the name of harmony, leaving us wondering if we are truly living in alignment with our inner selves or merely appeasing others. And as we grow older, the emotional cost of constant compromise becomes clearer. We begin to ask ourselves, am I adjusting out of love or out of a fear of conflict? In Buddhist teachings, there is a profound understanding that peace does not come from external sources. It comes from within. The external world may change, people may demand more from us, and life may throw us curveballs. But true peace is cultivated internally. It is not something that can be negotiated or compromised. It is a state of being that requires presence, mindfulness, and an unwavering commitment to self-compassion. When we allow our peace to be continuously compromised for the sake of others' comfort, we risk losing our sense of self. We risk becoming so entangled in the needs and desires of others that we forget the importance of maintaining our own emotional and mental well-being. The truth is, compromise in old age often drains more than it gives. The energy that once went into negotiating minor disagreements or making small adjustments begins to feel like an emotional expenditure that leaves us depleted rather than enriched. And when we're older, that depletion becomes more pronounced. We no longer have the same reserves of energy to give, and the compromises we make begin to feel more like burdens than acts of love. As we enter the twilight years of life, the question of balance becomes ever more important. Peace isn't just a luxury, it becomes a necessity. It is no longer an optional component of life, but the very foundation of our well-being. For older adults, peace of mind becomes crucial to aging with grace and joy. Without it, every day feels like an uphill battle against emotional fatigue and unresolved tension. In these later years, it's not only about learning to say no to others, but also about learning to say yes to ourselves, Self-compassion becomes a key part of the equation. Just as we show love and care to others, we must remember to extend that same compassion to ourselves. It's not selfish to prioritize our own peace. It's necessary for maintaining the emotional and mental health required to face the challenges of aging with resilience. As we reflect on Robert's situation, it's important to ask, what kind of compromises are we making? Are we doing it out of love or out of a desire to avoid conflict? Love should not feel like a burden. It should feel like a partnership, a mutual respect for each other's space and peace. When compromise begins to weigh heavily on our hearts, it's time to reassess what is truly important. In the end, our peace is sacred, and it is worth protecting. So, in the twilight of life, let us remember, peace is not a luxury, but a necessity. And compassion, true compassion, includes self-compassion. Only by honoring our own peace can we fully offer love and presence to those around us. Reason number 2, the disappearing independence. Frank, 78, had spent the majority of his life living for others. He was the epitome of selflessness, someone who had given his all for his family, his community, and his career. His love for his wife, his children, and his friends was unconditional. His hard work was unceasing, always striving to provide and care for those around him. But it wasn't until his wife, Mary, passed away that Frank began to see the truth he had been overlooking for so many years. For decades, Frank's life was intertwined with others. His decisions were influenced by his responsibilities, his family's needs, and the expectations of his community. His meals were prepared with care for his wife, his routines were adjusted to accommodate his children's schedules, and even his vacations were planned around the wants of others. Frank never considered what he wanted or needed. He simply followed the path of duty. This unyielding sense of responsibility, while noble, had come at a personal cost. It wasn't until the house grew quiet after Mary's passing that Frank was forced to confront a profound realization. He had never truly lived for himself. He had sacrificed so much, but in doing so, he had lost sight of his own desires, his own passions, his own sense of purpose. His identity had been bound to others, and now, in solitude, he found himself questioning who he was outside of the roles he had played. At first, solitude seemed like a heavy burden. The silence was deafening, and Frank couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. He had always been surrounded by the hum of life, his wife's laughter, his children's voices, the bustle of everyday responsibilities. Without them, Frank felt lost. But over time, something remarkable began to happen. He started to find freedom in the stillness. No longer did he have to cater to anyone else's needs. There was no schedule to follow, no obligations weighing him down. What once felt like loneliness began to feel like liberation. He started waking up when he felt like it, eating what he desired, and exploring hobbies he had long since abandoned. Frank realized that the freedom he had been yearning for was not a new reality. It was simply a rediscovery of what had always been there, his independence. This moment of clarity resonated deeply with Frank. In Buddhism, there is a concept known as non-attachment. It's often misunderstood as a cold detachment from the world, but in reality it refers to the wisdom of releasing the things that bind us to suffering, whether it's our attachment to people, possessions, or even expectations. Non-attachment is not about indifference, it's about freedom. Freedom from the need to control everything, freedom from the burden of pleasing others, and ultimately freedom to live in alignment with one's true self. As Frank continued to reflect on his life, he began to see that his independence had never truly been his to begin with. It had been shaped by the expectations of others. But now, in his later years, he had the opportunity to reclaim it. And this freedom was not selfish, it was sacred. To live fully as oneself is not a form of selfishness, but a spiritual practice. It is an expression of self-love and acceptance, and it creates space for greater connection with others, because when we are truly at peace with ourselves, we can share our love and energy freely, without need for validation or approval. Aging is often seen as a time of loss of strength, of mobility, of loved ones, but it is also a time of profound gift, the gift of independence, the freedom to live by our own rhythm. In the later years of life, we are given the rare opportunity to let go of the demands of others and to finally prioritize ourselves. It is easy to get caught up in the idea that we must continue to live according to societal norms or family expectations. But this is the time to honor our own desires, to discover what brings us peace, and to step into the fullness of our own being. Frank's journey wasn't just about physical independence, it was a spiritual awakening. In letting go of his attachments to others' needs and expectations, he found a deeper connection with himself and, in turn, with the world around him. True independence is not about isolation. It's about freedom from what confines us. It's about being able to stand in our own truth and to live authentically. So as we age, let us remember that the final chapter of our lives is not a time to shrink or become smaller in our world. It is the moment to expand, to grow into who we were always meant to be. Don't waste this precious gift of independence by trying to fit someone else's mold. Instead, embrace the wisdom that comes with aging, the freedom to be your truest self. Let go of the burdens that have held you down and step boldly into the life that is waiting for you. Reason number 3, emotional exhaustion in long-term partnerships. Let's revisit Robert. After his wife passed, he expected grief. Instead, he discovered serenity. For the first time in decades, he could breathe freely, choose freely, be freely. Robert had spent many years living in a relationship where emotional needs, desires, and decisions were often overshadowed by constant negotiation, compromise, and the delicate balancing act of keeping the peace. The loss of his wife, while tragic, also liberated him from the weight of that emotional exhaustion. Every meal no longer required a discussion. Every outing no longer required negotiation. Every opinion no longer required validation. There was a sudden stillness in his daily life, an absence of the constant back and forth that often defines long-term relationships. For the first time in many years, Robert could enjoy the simplicity of his own thoughts and desires without the need to filter or adjust them for someone else. He had the space to simply be. In long-term relationships, we often find ourselves in a pattern of emotional filtering. It's almost as if we've learned to suppress parts of ourselves to maintain harmony. We make small compromises, constantly adjusting our preferences, desires, and beliefs in an attempt to avoid conflict or discontent. Over time, this filtering becomes second nature, but it also slowly erodes our sense of self. We become so accustomed to adjusting to others' needs and expectations that we lose touch with our authentic voice. The irony is that we engage in this process because we want to nurture harmony, but in doing so, we may unintentionally create emotional exhaustion. Our mental and emotional energy is depleted by the ongoing effort to keep things smooth and peaceful. The cost of maintaining harmony in this way is often our own emotional well-being. Over the years, it becomes harder to distinguish between what we truly want and what we have merely agreed to for the sake of peace. Buddhism teaches, simplicity is the essence of happiness. And emotional simplicity, making choices without resistance or guilt, can be revolutionary in old age. This simplicity doesn't imply that we stop caring or being compassionate in our relationships. Rather, it suggests that we should make room for our own desires and needs alongside those of others. When we allow ourselves to live authentically, without the burden of constant emotional labor, we experience a new kind of freedom, one that is rooted in peace and contentment. It's about embracing the idea that we can choose for ourselves without the weight of expectation or compromise. In the context of aging, this realization can be especially profound. As we grow older, we often reflect more deeply on the years that have passed and the emotional costs we've paid to maintain harmony. There's a quiet realization that perhaps we have been living in a constant state of emotional debt, where every decision, every action has been a compromise. This emotional debt manifests itself in feelings of exhaustion, frustration, and sometimes resentment. And as we reach older age, we might find ourselves asking, was it worth it? Did I lose a part of myself in the process? If every day feels like a compromise, you may be living in emotional debt. It's time to return to balance. The path to emotional balance doesn't require us to abandon our loved ones or relationships. It simply asks that we reconnect with our own needs and desires, that we honor our authenticity without guilt or fear. This might mean taking small steps, saying no to things that don't serve us, allowing ourselves moments of solitude or self-care, and learning to make decisions based on what feels true to our inner selves rather than what we think others expect from us. As we age, we may begin to see the wisdom in honoring our own emotional needs. We have fewer years ahead of us, and perhaps we no longer have the energy to continually suppress or filter ourselves. Instead, we can choose to live more freely, embracing the simplicity that comes with being true to who we are. Emotional balance, at its core, is about reclaiming that freedom, the freedom to live authentically without the weight of unnecessary compromise or guilt. In the later stages of life, finding this balance can feel like an act of radical self care. It's about creating space for joy, peace, and personal growth, unencumbered by the emotional labor of constant compromise. For Robert, the death of his wife was the catalyst that allowed him to find this balance. But for many others, it can be a gradual process of self discovery, a slow and steady return to emotional simplicity. Ultimately, the goal is not to live a life devoid of relationships or shared experiences, but to live a life where we honor both our own emotional needs and the needs of those we love. It's a dance of give and take, but it begins with recognizing and respecting our own right to choose, to be free, and to find serenity in the simplicity of emotional honesty. Reason number 4, the unspoken burden of caretaking. James, 77, had always been a man of deep commitment. For decades, he had supported his wife, Margaret, in every way possible, from the small tasks of daily life to the larger responsibilities that came with their shared home and life. But now, as he watched her health decline, he found himself in the position of caretaker, something he had never expected to be. It began with small changes, helping her out of bed, preparing her meals, and making sure she took her medication. The days passed, and each one seemed to blend into the next, as James shifted from being a loving husband to a full-time caregiver. At first, it felt manageable. He was used to being active, used to doing things for Margaret, and it gave him a sense of purpose. But slowly, the weight began to build. What started as small chores grew into long hours spent tending to her needs, adjusting the bed, ensuring she was comfortable, taking her to appointments, and being there when she was frightened or confused. Every day, his own needs, his own health took a backseat. He would skip his own doctor appointments, tell himself that his aching joints could wait or that he would get some rest later. But later never came. Eventually, the toll became too much. James began to feel exhausted all the time. The once joyful man who had spent years tending to his garden and going for walks had now become a shadow of himself. His body ached, his mind was weary, and he was losing the very sense of who he was in the process of caring for his wife. He had been there for her through thick and thin, but now he was beginning to wonder how long he could keep going. James' story is not unique. Many elderly caregivers experience similar struggles, yet it is often an invisible burden, one that is rarely acknowledged. As they devote themselves to the care of their loved ones, they often sacrifice their own health and well-being, sometimes without even realizing the extent of the damage. Statistically, elderly caregivers are at a higher risk for developing physical and mental health problems, including depression, chronic illness, and sleep disorders. According to studies, the emotional toll of caregiving can lead to feelings of isolation, anxiety, and even despair. What makes the situation more challenging is that caregiving, at its core, is an act of love. When you care for someone deeply, it's hard to imagine saying no or stepping back. You want to do everything you can to make their life easier, more comfortable, and full of dignity. But in the process, caregivers often forget the importance of self-care, and that's where the real danger lies. Without boundaries, caregiving can turn from an act of love into an act of martyrdom. The caregiver loses themselves in the process, becoming a mere shell of who they once were. In Buddhist thought, compassion is a cornerstone of spiritual practice, but there is an important lesson here. Compassion should not come at the cost of your own well-being. The concept of self-care is integral to Buddhist philosophy. It's like the metaphor of the cup. If you continually pour from an empty cup, it becomes impossible to give anything of value to others. Caregivers often pour their energy into their loved ones, but in doing so, they risk becoming depleted, leaving them with nothing to give. Buddhism teaches that in order to truly show compassion and love for others, one must first cultivate compassion and love for oneself. This means acknowledging one's own needs, taking time for rest, and setting boundaries when necessary. It is not selfish to prioritize your health. It is, in fact, one of the most loving things you can do, both for yourself and for others. If you do not take care of yourself, you cannot offer the kind of care that is needed by your loved one. This is a hard lesson for many caregivers to learn, as the desire to be there for others can often overshadow the need for self-preservation. As James continued on his journey, he began to realize that he couldn't do it all on his own. He sought help from a local support group for caregivers and slowly began to understand the importance of asking for help. He learned to delegate some of the tasks he had once taken on himself and even started to take short walks again, giving himself the time he needed to recharge. The act of caregiving is a noble one, but it does not have to come at the expense of the caregiver's own health. It is not selfish to prioritize your health. In fact, it is the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others. By taking the time to nurture your own body, mind, and spirit, you are better equipped to give the care and love that your loved one deserves. The act of caregiving, while deeply meaningful, is not meant to deplete you. It is meant to enrich the life of your loved one, and that includes preserving your own well-being. True compassion begins with self-compassion, and in the act of caring for yourself, you open the door to offering even greater love and support to those around you. James found this truth to be a revelation, and it allowed him to regain balance in his life. By recognizing that his own health mattered, he could continue to care for Margaret in a way that honored both their needs. His love for her did not diminish by taking care of himself. It grew stronger, more sustainable, and more resilient. Reason number 5, the hidden financial and emotional strain. Robert again. A different Robert, now 80. After years of comfortable solitude, he entered a new relationship, feeling hopeful about the companionship he had longed for. His days, once peaceful and self-contained, were filled with shared moments, laughter, and the promise of mutual support. It seemed like the perfect new chapter. But then, a subtle shift began to occur. His partner, though kind and loving, brought with her a set of financial burdens that Robert hadn't anticipated. At first, it was small things. The occasional phone call about late bills, a reminder to handle something that seemed like an issue from the past. But soon, it escalated. Unpaid debts, overdue medical expenses, and financial support requested for her adult children began to creep into their daily life. What had been a peaceful retirement became a maze of shared bills, unspoken obligations, and an increasing sense of responsibility towards someone else's financial well-being. Robert, who had once felt in control of his life, was now caught in a situation where his financial independence, the bedrock of his comfort and peace, felt compromised. What began as companionship, gentle dinners, quiet walks, and shared plans for the future, transformed, almost unnoticed, into something heavier. The emotional and financial strain took its toll. Robert began to feel resentful, though he tried not to express it. The feelings simmered under the surface, and with them came a quiet unease, a slow shift in the way he viewed his relationship. It wasn't that he didn't care for her. Rather, the weight of financial strain was chipping away at his sense of autonomy, his freedom, and his ability to enjoy the simple pleasures of life. Money issues in old age aren't just about the dollars in your bank account. They represent something much deeper. They are about freedom, power, and emotional peace. For older adults, financial independence is often tied to personal dignity. The ability to manage one's own affairs without the worry of burdening others is not merely a practical concern, but a deeply emotional one. When finances become entangled in a relationship, the balance shifts and emotional tension can build. In Buddhist philosophy, wealth is not measured by how much you have, but by the freedom from desire or want. It's a subtle but profound shift in perspective. If a relationship brings with it the burden of financial guilt or responsibility, it detracts from your inner wealth. Your sense of peace is not just about physical possessions, but the emotional and mental space you maintain. Guilt, resentment, or worry over finances can cloud your ability to be truly present in a relationship, robbing both partners of the joy and tranquility that should come with shared companionship. The true test of wealth, then, is not in how much you accumulate, but in how free you feel from the chains of material need. If a relationship or any external circumstance places you in a situation where your emotional or financial peace is threatened, it's a sign that something needs to shift. While love and partnership often come with shared responsibilities, it's crucial to maintain boundaries that protect your peace. Robert's situation is one many older adults may face. The tension between the desire to help others, especially those we care about, and the need to preserve our own sense of security. It's a delicate balance and one that requires introspection and honest conversations. Financial support in relationships is a complex matter. It's not just about money, but about the emotional baggage that often accompanies it. The guilt, the resentment, the power dynamics that can shift when one person becomes dependent on another. Protect your peace, including your financial peace. Love should not cost your freedom. It's important to find harmony in relationships, ensuring that both emotional and financial support flow freely without causing harm. When emotional well-being and financial stability are aligned, both partners can enjoy the richness of a relationship without the heavy toll of sacrifice and resentment. Financial independence, just like emotional independence, is not about being alone. It's about preserving your peace, your freedom, and your ability to love without the underlying weight of obligation or guilt. Solitude is not loneliness. It is presence, clarity, and choice. It offers the opportunity to rediscover who we truly are without the external distractions of societal expectations or other people's needs. In this space of stillness, we can embrace our inner voice, listen to the quiet whispers of our heart, and reconnect with our deeper purpose. Staying single after 60 isn't about bitterness, it's about alignment. It's a conscious choice to live in harmony with our true selves. It's not a retreat into isolation, but an invitation to embrace independence, to re-examine the essence of who we are beyond the labels of wife, husband, or parent. It's about asking, who am I now, now that I am no longer defined by roles, responsibilities, or relationships? At Buddhist Mindfulness, we believe aging is a sacred return to self. It's a time to shed what no longer serves us and to cultivate wisdom through the experiences of our lives. And in that return, we must ask, is my companionship rooted in joy or just habit? Is it based in freedom or quiet fear? True companionship enriches our lives. It does not limit or define us. Don't stay because you're afraid to leave. Stay only if it deepens your peace, nurtures your spirit, and aligns with your truth. If this video resonated with you, please like and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Subscribe to Buddhist Mindfulness for more reflections on aging, healing, and spiritual growth. And tell us in the comments, what lesson did you take from today's video? What would you do differently in your own life? We read your stories fuel our mission. Thank you for being part of this mindful journey. See you in the next video. May you walk in peace.